a lot of people right now, everyone needs to be resilient going through what we're going through, and managing and doing so successfully. So I think that that's a really important skill to have.
And Bloom, thank you so much for being on my show. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. I'm great. 6 months into quarantine, but still surviving. Can't complain. How
So
are
I,
you?
I'm doing fine, but I see only one plant, and you said you have 100 plants in your apartment and three
There
trees, right?
Yes, this is one of the trees. Most of the plants are downstairs. It's hard to carry them up the stairs.
Of
So yeah,
course, of
most of them
course.
are. My living room, I've basically turned it into a greenhouse. During quarantine, I've had a lot of free time, so I've been doing gardening indoors because I don't have any outdoor space, unfortunately, and also painting. So
I love it. I love it. Okay, so I've been hearing that a lot. A lot of people have been taking up botanics and gardening lately. So this is it's definitely very interesting. And
it's like I figure if you can't go outside, might as well bring the outside in.
A 100%, 100%. So, I mean, it's a really fascinating journey that you've had. I'm very excited to hear about. The insights that you've gained along the years from running two accelerators in New York. One of them, the German accelerator, another one, Ellis. Moving on to early stage venture capital, helping European and Israeli startups break into the U.S. market with Angular Ventures as the head of platform. But you started out in corporates, right? You started out in mobile developer outreach for Facebook, right?
Well, actually, my first job ever after college was at Goldman.
As the
And
HR.
yeah, HR. So that was a great start. I really enjoyed starting my career at a large company, especially Goldman is a fantastic place to work, and got to meet, and work with some really incredible smart people.
100%. So I have to ask the German
Yeah.
accelerator. Uh, I was, but like I mentioned, I was looking forever for what is the name of the German accelerator, and you just helped me clarify a second ago. But please clarify for everybody watching this.
So the German accelerator's name is German Accelerator,
Very
which is
fitting.
probably the most German way to come up with an accelerator name. You have no idea how many times when I worked there, people would be like, "What's the name of the German accelerator?" I'm like, the German Accelerator.
I'm sure. I'm
Um,
sure.
so it's almost like it's comical now. I mean, it works. A ton of startups have gone through it, and the program's doing quite well. But the naming is
Whatever makes
always.
people talk about it more obviously works. But you're not from Germany. You're from France originally, right?
So my dad's American. He's a Jew from the Bronx, and then my mom was from Paris. So I basically spent. I was born in London, then lived in Paris for a bit, and when I was 3, I moved to New York. Still spending my summers in France, typically in Paris or the South, specifically Basque Country. And then in New York, I grew up in Westchester, went to the French American school. So I still, speak French and, try to keep that connection alive.
Right.
But I'm very Americanized in my culture. And no, I don't speak German, I'm not German at all. Fortunately, that wasn't a prerequisite to working at the German Accelerator.
How do you go from HR at Goldman Sachs to mobile developer outreach at Facebook to running two accelerators at the same time in New York?
Great question. I would love to say that I had this big grand plan for my career of I'll do this and then I'll do that. No, not at all. This is not planned. It just happened, and I don't get me wrong. I'm very happy with the outcome of it. But the mindset I had when I started my career was, or at least my first job at Goldman was, I love this. This is fantastic. I'm supporting. Basically, my role there was in learning and development and helping the 9,000 plus engineers that worked at Goldman know everything they needed to know from the technical side all the way to soft skills. And I was there for about a year and a half, and I thought I was going to be a lifer. I really jived with the corporate culture. My dad had worked there for a long time. Um, and I think especially coming straight from college, being in a part of the whole analyst class, the summer training programs, it's just a lot of fun. Um, and then I knew ultimately I didn't want to be in HR long term. It just wasn't exactly, I really enjoyed it, but I knew that I didn't want to make a career in that.
Now, when you say
So,
HR, just to clarify, because there's a lot of different facets
yeah,
in HR. So, what specifically were you working on within
yeah.
Goldman Sachs?
So learning and development, and I was specifically on the Goldman Sachs University
Okay,
technology
okay,
team. So that team, I was very lucky in that I was placed on the tech team, right? Because you get accepted and then you go to Goldman Sachs University and they have different teams aligned to the different divisions. And, most people wanted to be on the IBD team or securities, right? Like the
right.
sexy teams. And I was like, no, put me on tech. This is like, I find interesting. I want to be with my techies. And, back then, like, I think, especially in New York, tech wasn't cool. And I was very lucky that I got placed on that team. I got to meet, a ton of really great engineers and work with them. And also happened to fall into this tech world, which I fell in love with. And, after working with engineers for a while, I realized, okay, I really am into this tech scene. How can I get more into this? And the logical conclusion was, okay, go to a tech company. And one of my best friends from Cornell, she was at Facebook working on the FB Start program. So she kind of pulled me in. It happened very quickly.
Very,
And
very cool.
I joined at the end of 2015. And it was an amazing experience. I mean, it was a very small team. We were 3 people, and we
Wow.
were running a program with, at the time, over 12,000 startups all around the world. So it was a very much a scaled program, but we were able to support them in a scaled manner, do events all around the world, give them benefits, mentorship from Facebook, community, etc.
So you're saying that
Um,
there wasn't this grand plan, but I do see a pattern. I am working on a pattern here that you're
yeah,
starting out sort of in finance, but you're gravitating towards tech, and then you find yourself helping 12,000 startups within Facebook. So it is now very logical as to how you went to
yeah.
create two accelerators, and then you end up uh, helping leverage the portfolio companies for an early stage venture capital fund like Angular Ventures.
Absolutely. So I will say that, you know, like when I was still in school and I didn't know what I wanted to do, I just knew that I wanted to have like a positive impact, whatever it was that I was doing. And then fell into the tech world and then ended up working with startups at Facebook. And that's when I knew, okay, I like fell in love with the startup game and this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, right? Be supporting startups, hopefully helping them achieve their goals. And, ideally I would love to be involved with building the next Google or other big tech
Right.
company. And it was a really awesome experience. I think especially being in Silicon Valley, I moved there in 2015.
Hmm.
Facebook was growing incredibly quickly at the time. There was nothing quite like it. I will say, just from a social perspective, moving from downtown Manhattan to Menlo Park was a little bit
I'm
of
sure.
was a bit of a change, but it was an incredibly exciting experience and one that I was very fortunate to be a part of. And I was on the platform partnerships team. And the thing with Facebook is things change really quickly from one day to the next. So after about a year and a half working there, I knew that I wanted to come back to the East Coast. Most of my family and friends are here, and I also saw that the New York City tech scene was starting to really come into its own,
Hmm.
and I wanted to be a part of that because I was like, there's something here, and I miss the New York energy, and there's something really special about New York. So I came back, and I kind of did something that's like I feel like most people would discourage doing it, but I thought it was fantastic. Is after working at Goldman and Facebook, I was tired. Both were very intense jobs,
Right.
working, late night every night, working most weekends. And I was like, I need a break.
So
So
you
I
go and
took
you run two accelerators at the same time. Makes sense.
well, before that, I took 6 months off to travel the world. I went to Israel for the first time, which was amazing, and went to a bunch of other places.
Wonderful.
And after, I thought like being somewhat of a workaholic, I thought I would be so bored during my time off, and that was not at all the case. I was having a blast. I was like,
Well,
I could do this for a couple of years. This is great.
a
Um,
couple of years, then you throw yourself again into this environment. I'd love
yeah,
to understand a little bit better about your insights from running those two accelerators, specifically this whole notion of breaking into the US market. I think it's something that's
Yeah,
extremely
yeah.
fascinating, both for startups that are starting out in the US market, but also for a lot of my friends around Europe and Israel who are running their companies. A lot of them are considering when to relocate. I'm very, very good friends with Shuli and Gil from Upwest, and Yair and Guy from Fusion LA. And so there's a lot of talk about how to help outside companies break into the US market. And I'd love to hear a little bit about your insight from doing that, both from the accelerator, and then we'll transition also into your work with Angular Ventures.
Of course. Yeah, so when I came back to New York, I started working at the German Accelerator, and that program was about bringing German startups to the US market. I think that Germany was ahead of the game. It was actually a program sponsored by the German government, so it's
Oh,
free for the
wow.
startups, zero equity, zero fees,
Wow.
everything, yeah, which was very special. And I think Germany rightfully realized that the way to long term grow their economy was really investing in their startups. And a big part of that investment is helping them come to the US. I think that this is something that's especially true for companies that are B2B, especially enterprise, right? Just because so many of the largest companies are based in the US,
Right.
and being able to meet with them and get their feedback and bring them on as design partners is so vitally important.
Sure.
So that program, I ran that program as a program manager for 2 years, and then also saw that there was a big appetite for startups who wanted to come to the U.S. from other parts of the world. I know Israel, that's been so ingrained in the Israeli
Right.
ecosystem for so long that for Israelis it's like obviously this is a no-brainer. But for a lot of other countries, it was less obvious. I think too for startups, say from France or from Italy or Germany, there can be that fallacy of like my market is big enough, right? I
Right.
I can go to the top French companies and grow it through there, but ultimately you tap out of your market really quickly. And by the time you're like, okay, I conquer the French market, now it's time to go to the US, you could have a competitor here that's already taken over the market,
Sure.
and you might be put at a serious disadvantage. So we saw that there was this need. So I co-founded Ellis Accelerator, and we ran 3 different cohorts through that program, and that was all about bringing companies from all around the world to the U.S. And it worked pretty well. I'd say that the biggest reasons for startups to think about coming to the U.S. and obviously the way you do that now with COVID is a bit different than the way you did it
Right.
before, but the reasons are still fundamentally the same, right? Sales acceleration. So we've actually done a bit of research, and for more than 80% of startups that come to the US, their sales drastically increased
Really,
after
eighty
coming here.
percent,
83%,
eighty-three
yes.
percent. That's wow.
Yeah. And then also, it's much easier to fundraise, right? There's a lot of investors in the US, there's a lot of money flowing. And so, for about 40% of the startups that came here, they had an easier process fundraising. And
But I do have to ask, Anne, because obviously there is this, the mindset shift is a challenge on its own, right? So providing that accessibility into the American mindset and actually making that move of transitioning the business towards the U.S. market. But what other challenges did you notice, whether it's through the German Accelerator or else? What are some of the common challenges that companies or early stage companies face as they come to the US and they're saying like, wow, like this is something either we didn't expect, or wow, this is like a
yeah,
hurdle that we're facing along with a lot of other newcomers here?
I think there's a lot of challenges. Um, and some of them are foreseen, some of them are not.
Mhm.
I would say an interesting thing, especially I'm based in New York, a lot of founders that come here and they're just like blown away by how expensive everything is, right? It's just like you come here,
Sure.
office is expensive, talent is expensive, everything's expensive. And so I would say going into it, like be prepared to make an investment because there will be a lot of upfront costs. So that's one thing. It's just it's a big investment just from a time
Sure.
perspective and also a capital perspective. I would say managing the culture is quite difficult when you now all of a sudden have a team in the U.S., in Israel, right? Time zone makes it challenging to meet. When you're hiring American employees, the
Sure.
culture there can be some clash where you know you're both speaking English, but you may still not be able to understand what the other person is saying implicitly. And then I would say too, another trap that a lot of startups I see fall into is hiring the wrong people.
Mm,
You see this especially with sales people. American salespeople are really good at selling themselves. And especially for someone coming from outside the US, they hear them and like they talk about their sales experience and it's like this is perfect.
right.
This person is going to grow our sales funnel tremendously. And then a couple months down the line, it doesn't work. I would honestly say that like most times the initial salespeople don't end up working
Interesting.
out. So the advice I'd give there is like be very, very careful who you bring onto the team. Hire slow, and if they don't work out, like if you're even thinking about letting someone go, let them go.
Right.
Right.
Hire slow, fire fast.
Exactly. And I think that holds true both domestically and when you're in the US. But especially because salaries are more expensive here, it can be very costly to keep someone on if they're not, you know, bringing in real revenue
A hundred
from the
percent, a
sales
hundred
side.
percent. And I want to make sure we also have enough time to talk about Angular Ventures because I think that
Yeah, yeah, of course.
being head of platform for an early stage fund, um, the mission is very clear and it's something that I really resonate to and it's not too far off from what you were doing with the two other accelerators, but now you're doing it with the head of a VC and you're doing it with portfolio companies that you have a stake in, right? So it's no longer just companies that are coming in and they're asking for your help, but you have a stake in the game. Talk to me a little bit about what Angular Ventures is and what is your specific role within that fund that is bridging the gap between basically the whole world.
Absolutely. So basically, Angular Ventures is an early stage fund that invests in startups from Europe and Israel. We'll typically do checks from anywhere from 200,000 to 1.5 million. We do lead, we do follow on. Our focus is deep tech enterprise. About half of our portfolio currently is Israeli based or Israeli founders, and the other half is spread out throughout Europe. And I met Gil Dibner, the partner of the fund, about a year before the fund officially closed for Fund One. And I was always intrigued by venture capital. I wasn't necessarily pursuing it because I was happy in the accelerator world,
Right.
but I was really interested with what Gil was doing. His track record's really impressive. I mean, 4 out of 30 investments that he's made have become unicorns.
Wow.
And then the idea of working um, in a situation, because the downside with working in the accelerator world, right, is you're working with these companies super intensely for 3 months, right? And then it's like little birds, they fly away and they go do their own thing. And you obviously still keep in touch, but it's not the same level of work. Whereas in the VC world, and this was something that really appealed to me, is that you can have this long-term relationship with these founders, get in at the absolute earliest stage. We'll do checks with someone with just an idea, right? We like getting in very, very early and help them build their company from
Right.
the ground up. So, and then work with them for 10 years plus, maybe.
Of course.
And so that was incredibly appealing to me. And then also the idea, having founded my own company before, I love the idea of being the first platform hire and building the platform up from the ground up. And fortunately, I would say that Gil, the partner of the fund, he is very dedicated to working with the portfolio companies as well. So he spends about half his time working with existing
Wow.
companies, and the other half obviously working on deal flow and evaluating new opportunities. And of course, that shifts
Of
with
course.
the COVID epidemic, or sorry, the COVID pandemic. Um, you know, like many other VCs, we were primarily focused on our own portfolio, even though we were still doing deals actively. But just making sure that the portfolio will survive and thrive during this time.
Of course.
So, we've built some few really exciting things on the platform side. Ultimately, our goal is to be supportive of our founders and their startups and ensure that they have all the resources and connections they need in order to be successful. So I would say some of the more interesting or impactful things that we offer the portfolio companies are we have about a dozen advisory partners, which include uh, founders, like we have the two unicorn founders from JFrog and SciSense, and we
Wow.
also have subject matter experts from like branding, marketing, sales, etc. So whenever any of our portfolio companies have a need on one of these key areas, we'll pair them with these advisory partners, and then they
Right.
work long term together. So oftentimes working together for a year or more. So it's a really deep relationship. We also want to focus on things that really move the needle. And especially working with enterprise startups, the contract sizes for customers can be so big that if
Right.
we can help them get one new client, you know, we've done our job. So we do focus a lot on bridging the corporates in our network with this portfolio companies in our to see if there's any possibility for like design partnerships or for the corporates to potentially become customers ultimately. We've done a few really interesting research reports. So at the start of the pandemic, we looked at how COVID was impacting startups, from how many of them were changing their product to doing layoffs to what exactly were the
Right.
startup founders thinking of throughout this time. We just released last week a report on enterprise deep tech VC in Europe and Israel. So if anyone's interested in reading that, it's up on Medium. Definitely encouraged to check it out. And then we're right now working with Index Ventures, specifically talking or looking at how Israeli startups can successfully expand to the US market, which is, of course, top of mind for a lot of founders.
100%. So, and before we end, I have to go back and look at your journey a little bit more holistically, because you've gone through so many different
Yeah.
experiences. A lot of them are in the same line of thought of how do we work with early stage companies to either help them break into the US market or continue to scale and grow. And I'd love to hear from you some of the insights that you've gained throughout the years. If you were to look back and talk to a young entrepreneur or a young person that's going into the tech scene or any scene, what are some key things that they should keep in mind as they go on their career path?
So basically, what are some career tips?
Right.
Okay, I have quite a few of these. A lot of these I had to learn the hard way.
Yep.
So
And now I
if
get
I
to
can
now I
help,
get to hear them the easy way.
so if this helps one person, hopefully it's worth it. What the trials and tribulations I went through. So I would say I have 5 tips for people who are in their career, and that for me have been quite valuable. So the first is storytelling. Everything at the end of the day is about how you can create an interesting and compelling story. Whether you're in college trying to land a job, right? You have to create a good story about why what you've done in the past is relevant for the company, why
Sure.
your value add for the specific company. Whether you're a founder that's creating a story about why an investor should invest in your specific company. So I think storytelling is really important. For me in my career, uh, I used storytelling when I was pivoting out of HR and went to Facebook. And the way that I focused on it was rather than focusing on the fact that I was in HR, it was like, no, I was running programming for tech, right? Which is very relevant to running a startup program at Facebook. Um, and then I would say another thing that's really important is very few things are worth being the hill to die on. I've been
What does
guilty
that
of
mean?
this. Yeah, so basically what that means is don't ruin professional relationships trying to prove your point, right? I've been guilty of this at times, especially early on in my career, where it's like you know the right answer or you think you know the right answer, and you really want to like make sure the team or your company does it that way.
Right.
And it can, definitely backfire on you if you're really like holding steady on this. So what I do now is say my thoughts and what I think we should do. And if leadership wants to do it, awesome. If not, fine.
Mhm.
Just not getting as like personally invested. I will caveat that by saying there are some things which are worth being the hill to die on.
Right.
I've personally encountered one of them, and it was literally, if we don't do this, I will walk away from the company. Like that's
Wow.
so. It does happen occasionally, but I think ultimately, be very mindful of not ruining your relationships, because your teammates, you have to work with them. This project is going to be over at some point, soon, but the teammates, if you're working at this company for years, you have to continue working with them. So I think it's really important to have positive relationships with them.
I have to say,
And some,
regarding that point, it's so interesting. I remember I often reflect back to my officers academy training, and I remember
yeah.
that one of my commanders there, she gave us a talk about our values and the things that we are really passionate about, and especially in a military setting, it's often a very interesting balance between the things that you believe in, the things that the system believes in. At the end, you have a very you know your role within an organization, and it's perhaps it's accelerated within a military organization because the thing you're working towards is different than just monetary value for the company. But one of the things she told us is that you really have one chance within an organization to choose something that is worth fighting for enough that you're saying, I'm putting my keys down, and if this is not happening, then I'm walking away. But you only get to do that once, really, because the second time and the third time it doesn't really work. I definitely, I haven't used that card yet in any
Mhm.
organization, but I definitely see, and I can 20 minutes go by so fast, and I obviously there are so many more things that I can learn from you. But before we leave, I have to ask you for three words that you would use to describe yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, if I had to use three words to describe myself, the first is being determined. So if I get an idea in my head, whether it's in like work or in my personal life, like it will happen. Like
Yep.
come hell or high water, I will make it happen. Um, and so that's it. Career-wise, it's been pretty helpful. And then I would say I tend to be pretty resilient.
Mhm.
There's been a number of times where I had to face things that were pretty challenging. A few times where I had to completely start from scratch. Right when I moved back to New York after leaving Facebook, I didn't have an apartment. I was staying at my friend's place, didn't have a job, so completely rebuilding my life from
Right.
scratch. And I think it takes a lot of resiliency to do that and do it well. And I think a lot of people right now, everyone needs to be resilient going through what we're going through, and managing and doing so successfully. So I think that that's a really important skill to have. And then lastly, I would say kindness. There's that famous line that goes, nice guys finish last. And I think that is absolutely not true. I think in the short term, being Machiavellian can pay off, but long term, it 100% does not pay off, because people will learn that about you and then they just will not want to work with you. So I think being kind, both personal life and professional life, is 100% the right way. And it's worked really well for me.
And thank you very, very much. Thank you for being so generous with your time and for all the inspiration and insights through all this. It was really wonderful. I had a great time.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute pleasure.
Of course. Take care. Stay safe and stay healthy.